welcome to Past, Present, and Future, or Three Questions, the podcast where we learn about people's career journeys, how they got to where they are today, and where they'd like to go to next. I'm Parrots Cohen, a technologist and a wordsmith, and in my time in industry, I've been fortunate to work with both large companies and small startups, alongside a number of very talented and hardworking individuals. This podcast is some of my conversations with them, where we learn about their journeys and what motivates them. If you'd like to be in the podcast, please feel free to reach out. You don't have to have a certain level of seniority or a number of years of experience. We all have something to share and learn from each other. If you'd like to sponsor the podcast or get involved in the collaboration, we'd also like to hear from you. All right, looking forward to our journey together as we learn more about each other and enrich ourselves in the process.
Hello, everybody. Today we have an amazing guest. We have Andy on the show. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thank you so much.
All right, let's take it from the top. Love to hear more about kind of the beginnings of your career and kind of how that journey started.
Yeah, it was really funny. When you reached out, I started to think about this. Basically, my career has been defined by the major political and historic events that have happened in the last 25 years. When I was at John Hancock, I was in a pretty straightforward operational role. And what happened was 2008, and the mortgage collapse occurred. And all of a sudden, all of these financial products that John Hancock had were suddenly a liability. They had gone from the number one profit center for an entire company to an enormous liability. And what I was asked to do is they said, hey, we need to get rid of all of this. We need to get this out of here. And we need to find some other people to process this offshore. And so my job basically became dismantling an organization that 18 months prior had been literally one of the most profitable parts of the organization. And when I think about that, it's honestly this strange thing, because when I went to State Street a couple, 4 or 5 years later, and even when I came to Amazon I came to in 2020, it was because of COVID, because all of a sudden Amazon was hiring all of these people because they were like, they'd seen this enormous amount of growth. And it was just like, and I look back on it, it's like something enormous happens in the world, from the banking crisis to the PPP loans to the bailouts to COVID. And it's like all of those events have been triggering for my career in this incredibly strange way. So yeah, it's been a very, very strange career, but it is what it is.
No, I mean, I think that's such an important point. Like, well, all we do is not in isolation. And I think for so many areas, especially within program management, it is so tied to the realities of the industry, the different needs, or in kind of, yeah, as those factors shift. Yeah, so would you say kind of within this journey and kind of moving within different areas within program management,
Yeah.
are there things you wish you knew kind of upfront? And then a kind of a secondary piece of that question is, what has been helpful for you in kind of in not just adjusting companies and industries, but kind of maybe verticals to a degree, kind of within what you supported in program management?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've spent the last year or so sort of giving myself my own little MBA. When I went to college and graduate school, I was very much in a international relations diplomacy kind of space. And that as a career didn't work out for me. And so I learned on the job a lot. You learn how to manage stakeholders, you learn how to handle change processes, you learn some all of these things as you go. And the funny thing is that I never truly learned how to, like, what the formal way of doing it was. And I really didn't want to necessarily go back to school to get like an MBA or something like that. So I just kind of started saying, where am I working in spaces that I don't necessarily have a sort of formalized way to do it? And so I started to look at, like, I got my PMP. I went through ProSci and got a change management certification. I learned Six Sigma because people talk about Six Sigma as if it's like this magical thing out of nowhere. And I started just sort of building out sort of formalized parts of my education. And in some ways, I wish I sort of balanced that out I wish I'd sort of done it as I went. Because I think a lot of things, um, because I think a lot of things that I just sort of like, I was like, well, I'm doing my job as required. I don't really need to learn sort of these formalized things, but I look back, especially after I've completed those courses, and I say like, oh man, it would have been really helpful had I known this or had I sort of taken that strategy. And I didn't, and I'm still, you know, you can still color me skeptical of MBA programs because I think I still am, but I think there is a value in as you are learning and as you are taking on jobs to just continue to learn outside of your work. You know, put the 10 hours a week aside or 5 hours and just kind of keep learning and keep trying. Um, and sorry, and what was the second part of your question? That was sort of the first part, and then I've completely blanked on the second part.
Yeah, the second part was kind of like what was helpful and kind of in adapting and kind of in moving to these new industries. But definitely agree with you at that first point. Like instead of seeing learning as a one-time event, having a little bit more kind of something be continual. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the key to being a good program manager is just being flexible. You will see people who are in the program management role or project management roles, and they are um, they're very rigid about things. Like it has to be this way, it has to fit in this box, and we have to use lean methodologies, or we have to use agile here, or we have to use Scrum. Like, and it's you see people focus so much on the specifics of how something has to be done, when really what you should be doing, I think, is you need to adjust to the environment that you're in. If a team needs to really get documentation down, well, then just do it a certain way. If they're really sort of figuring out where they need to go, I think it's a really different conversation. And so I anyone who's sort of in that space, I would do your best to be comfortable with change yourself and be comfortable with being unsure. And if someone comes to you and you have absolutely no idea how to do it, take that um, as an advantage that you've never done this before and you're going to figure out how to do it. Um, and you'll get there. And it doesn't have to be something that you've seen 100 times before.
Yeah, I think that's it's and especially kind of within program management, I think it's an interesting dual nature of being able to be adaptable and flexible, but also being able to bring very kind of concrete tooling within program management. So which is I think that's a great duality you capture. But I think looking a little bit kind of almost the inverse of kind of some of the previous discussion and previous question is what would like in a world where you can either kind of there's current trends you're seeing kind of following the earlier parts of your career like a certain
Yeah.
trends you'd want to be involved in, or is there kind of somewhere else you want to kind of proactively the types of challenges you'd like to take on in the future and kind of steer kind of your program management journey in?
Yeah. So the market is telling, I think, everyone right now that AI is sort of the end all be all. And so, what I think I would encourage everyone to do is to look at what AI can do and then also sort of reset your expectations. The people who are sitting down right now and saying AI is going to solve every problem under the sun, I think are probably people more interested in selling you something than they are in actually solving your problems. AI is a tool, and in my garage, just over there, I have 1,000 different tools. Okay, and one tool is not good for the other job, and one job is not good for the other tool. And I think we are in that space, and this is not dissimilar to when the internet started. When we were talking about the early internet in like 92, 93, where people are like, oh, it's going to do everything. Well, it doesn't really do everything, but it touches a lot of things. So I think the smartest thing that people can do is they can learn about just how AI works, how it's sort of structured, and why it's useful. The AWS AI practitioner certification is like $100. It maybe takes a couple weeks of prep, and it gives you a really good baseline for where AI is. And the conversations that I find myself in when talking about AI is often everyone just needs to slow down a little bit and actually look at the productization of these products. If I put Excel in front of you 25, 35 years ago, are you going to go, oh, this is going to be the backbone of every company? No, you look at it as like, this is something helpful for me to build some tables and hold some information. Now, Excel becomes more useful because we've thought about different ways of using it and different things that we can pull out of it. But we're sort of in an inverse place with AI where they're like, it's going to do everything, but it's not really going to do everything. I think it's going to be really helpful in a lot of spaces, but the idea that it's going to replace every single job or um, do every single thing that we ever needed to, I think is an overpromise based off based off a lot of money that's being dumped into it.
No, I think it's something that I kind of reflected upon recently when like interacting with AI and like thinking like a correlator for search, for example. Like there was this idea like search is extremely powerful and it's
Sure.
become a backbone of our modern lives, but there are things that search isn't great for. And I think
Right.
it's yeah, it's interesting. Like I think it's definitely a similar cycle throughout kind of each new trend in tech and something being presented as kind of the solve all. And there's kind of like a marketing shaking out period, both from investment and operationally, until it becomes useful, until it's about that jobs to be done. It's about that product mindset and seeing it as the end state as opposed to, as a tool as opposed to the end state.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think this is my personal opinion. I think something similar we see in program management. It's again as well like that continuous learning. What is the tool that's useful for this situation, as opposed to the program management framework being the end goal in itself, which
Right.
can happen in larger companies.
Right. Yeah. It's one of those things where we will only do adjust to the new space that we are in. But I think anytime anyone is over promising,
Yeah, I think for me, I think a lot of kind of the point of this podcast is to not just kind of share like this is what's the best way to enter program management career or another career. It's really about kind of connecting. Like a lot of what we do professionally is so entwined with the personal, what's happening in the world around us, the way we approach these things. And I think like that's the beauty of having these conversations, is sharing these mindsets and sharing not just kind of I went here and then I went there, but how I approached it and kind of how you can have kind of a career of longevity by adopting some of these mindsets and frameworks. And so this was incredibly useful. So definitely very appreciative of you sharing this and coming and joining the show today.
well, thanks so much for having me.